Mic check, mic check. Alright. Sorry, I'm using the backup mic today. I gotta replace the charging cable. Okay. And we might find some dinosaur-related stuff to play while we're doing this. Let's take a quiet game. So I'm streaming, but see if it plays out right. The music again.
Well, hi there. This is Tyrannosaurus, the most famous of all Mesozoic dinosaurs, and probably
biggest carnivore the world has ever seen.
It's falling down a little bit. I can't hear him right now, but
the most reasonable
his
pet.
levels.
And given some of the widely reported failures
So
that have
slightly lower than
occurred
mine.
keeping them contained in recent decades, I want to take some time with my paleontologist friend Ethan here and his friends Dynamo and Chomper to discuss what it would take to actually keep one of these. And to discuss some major new discoveries that are rewriting our
Control Center,
understanding of the entire
Arrival Point,
Tyrannosaurid family.
Visitor Center,
Because as unreasonable
Science
as
Center,
this
Expedition
Tyrannosaurus
Center,
Rex
Staff
would be
Center
to keep,
1,
as juvenile
Response Facility
Chomper
1,
here, who was found
Capture
very
Team
recently
2,
and is a big part of the reason
Paleo
that
Medical
Tyrannosaurus
Facility
biology
1.
just broke wide open. They can seem
I guess it,
much more reasonable.
I
In
don't know why it
fact,
was labeled as
I
one, but
wouldn't be surprised to find out
get
that
it
a
started, I
juvenile
guess.
Tyrannosaurus Rex would make a more reasonable pet
I
than
don't know what the
a
vision
mature,
for this place
which
is
is
yet, I'll be
the
honest.
lowest scoring
Probably
pet
should get
that
some
we have
power
ever
supply
reviewed to
shit,
this
yeah.
point. So I guess the real question is not whether or not Tyrannosaurus Rex is a good pet, because it isn't, but is it a better pet than you are? And to figure this out, we will have to give the Tyrant Lizard King a score based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, it's a little bit of a tricky one. As hatchlings, they were only about 3 feet long, around 90 centimeters. So smaller than Leonard, who can certainly hurt you, especially if he had the jaws of a tyrannosaur, which we'll discuss here in a moment. But there is a little bit of evidence that Tyrannosaurus Rex showed some parental care, and even more evidence, perhaps, that they were social. For example, a juvenile T-Rex was found with a broken leg that had healed, suggesting that it was taken care of, or at least protected, by its parents. Also, almost all extant dinosaurs display considerable parental care. And T-Rex is more closely related to those dinosaurs than it is to dinosaurs like Giganotosaurus that we discussed last week, or Spinosaurus that we discussed last Dinosaur December. We have evidence of parental care in multiple, distantly related dinosaur lineages. And parental care is actually common across extant archosaurs. Alligators and crocodiles are also great parents. I guess what I'm saying is that it is entirely possible that juvenile Tyrannosaurus rexes may have been more behaviorally similar to juvenile birds, even mammals, than they are to lepidosaurs, like Leonard. Not to mention the fact that if they form social bonds into adulthood, then it may be possible to form a lasting social bond even after they reach adulthood. Raising a T-Rex could be a lot like raising a wolf. Except it's 40 feet long, it's 9 tons. So not
Probably
exactly.
definitely not.
But it may actually like you. It would still probably kill you, accidentally, if in no other way, but it might see you as a friend, not food. And it would see you really well, and not just when you move. It had some of the largest eyes of any land animal ever, and visual acuity is generally tied to absolute eye size and not relative eye size. So it would see you very well, and smell you even better. And we'll have Ethan tell us a lot more about the physical capabilities of T-Rex in a moment. But I do want to give them a score for handleability. As a juvenile, it's entirely possible that T-Rex would be very reasonable, though still potentially dangerous to handle. If they stayed like that, I would probably give them a 3 or a 4, depending on how friendly they really were. But, and this is an important but, T-Rex has a particularly rapid growth rate. Ethan will fill us in on how fast. But they're going to be big enough to kill you and eat you very quickly. As we'll discuss later, there was a Tyrannosaurus that would stay rather reasonable, but this is going to be too big to handle very fast. Maybe it will like you enough that you can direct it where to go with some efficacy, but at a very young age, it will only do what it chooses to do, and you'll have no say in the matter. So we give it a 0 for handleability. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about what you know about, first off, juvenile Tyrannosaurus rexes? Parental care, sociality, and maybe other things like their vision and general physiology that might be important should you ever interact with a Tyrannosaurus. Yes.
I guess I'll start first by introducing myself in case you haven't seen some of the other videos I've featured in.
Yes, please.
I'm Ethan. I am a paleontologist that works here in Utah, and I actually helped dig up and work on this specimen right here. I was one of the primary paleontologists working on Dynamo. And so I specialize in theropods, specifically Tyrannosaurs and T-Rex itself. So that's why out of all my tattoos, T-Rex gets its own eye. So I guess let's just dive into your questions about T-Rex growth and care and handleability. So T-Rex, like you were saying earlier, started small. As you mentioned, we're talking it was probably only about 3 feet long, about a foot tall, and weighed as much as a terrier. So they started out life pretty small.
Very reasonable creature.
Very reasonable creature. But also, like you mentioned, not for long. T-Rex grew rapidly. Now, at first, you'd have a nice terrier-sized little T-Rex that was even very likely fluffy, because, much like modern day dinosaurs and birds, they might have started out with one type of intelligence, eventually another one, aka starting out fluffy and feathered before growing out of it and becoming scaly, because the skin impressions we have of T-Rex are primarily scaly. But they're all adults. And we do know that earlier Tyrannosaur species were feathered, meaning that there's a high implication that T-Rex wasn't something by itself.
And that's because you've got a lot more surface area per unit volume than the little. So if you're a little bitty endotherm, you need some insulation.
Exactly, especially if you're growing that quickly. You don't want to put all of that nice metabolic energy into keeping yourself warm. You want to put it into growing quick.
But if you're this big, you overheat.
Yes, exactly. Much like modern day elephants. They start out life a lot fluffier, a lot more mammoth-like, and then eventually go into bald animals. So, started out small, even likely fluffy, and they grew very quickly. Now, even when independent from the adults, if there was parental care, they likely ate smaller, faster-moving prey than the adults. This is probably to avoid competition with the adults. As you can see, even in the skull, and if you're familiar with adult T-Rex skeletons, including Chomper, these guys almost look like different species. Are, depending on the specimen, because they're so radically different. This is a much more live, fast-moving, gracile animal than what we see in the giant bruisers. So even the larger adolescent tyrannosaurs were probably going after things like ornithomimids, the ostrich-like dinosaurs, pachycephalosaurs, or juveniles of other fast-moving species. Now, that is due to their dramatic body plan, but as far as going earlier into their ontogeny, or their growth, parental care is not for sure known. However, our modern analogs, like you said, bring up great evidence for the fact that these guys were probably doted upon to some degree by at least one parent. Because if based off phylogenetic bracketing, which we can also use for some behaviors, we see parental care in crocodilians, which split off before dinosaurs even split off from dinosaurs, and in modern day birds, meaning parental care is present. So that suggests that T-Rex also experienced some degree of parental care as it was growing. Now, as far as its senses, T-Rex was refined in every way. The eyesight was over 10 times as strong as yours and mine, and had twice as good a vision as that of a hawk. Now, they also could hear infrasound, which is pretty common for megafaunal herbivores and carnivores, and they had a sense of smell comparable to, or even better than, turkey creatures. They could sniff out prey from over a mile away.
I don't like those odds.
Yeah, it's tough. And then even as a baby, I mean, you can see, I was pointing out to you earlier, you can see how snappy even as an adolescent, if you manage to get one socialized to you, and that's even a big if I still would be very cautious around this. And that's just the jaws. If you look at the claws, even on the fingers and the toes, this is not an animal that you would want upset at you or throwing a tantrum.
Yep, Leonard just clawed me up not long ago, and these claws, even on the forelimbs, are just as bad as his.
Let alone the hind limbs, which are already as long as a grizzly bear's.
And I'm sure these jaws are nowhere close to as strong as the adults. I'd like to hear just how strong these jaws are. But you can see there's a lot of places for some serious jaw muscle attachment. This would be a grievous bite even from this.
These guys, even if they were being doted on by parents, they're likely precocial, meaning that they were pretty active and independent from birth. And that means that they had to be able to tackle large amounts of meat. So, this guy was definitely full of razor-sharp teeth and strong bite to be able to take down anything mom and dad were dropping into its nest, which, I mean, 66 million years ago, that might have been us. So,
and what do you think of our score of 0 out of 5 for handleability?
I think that's entirely accurate. I think that you would already be very cautious about handling it as a baby, let alone a, not even 6-month-old individual like Chomper, let alone a full-grown adult. So, yeah, I think it's accurate. Babies would do some major damage, and you just don't handle the adults. The adults might handle you with their mouths,
you wouldn't want that.
but just once.
Fair enough. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love dinosaurs. And if you love dinosaurs, you probably hated the movie 65. Because the dinosaurs were... It's like they didn't really know what dinosaurs were, and they'd just heard about them once in passing. Dinosaurs make everything better, unless the dinosaurs are super unrealistic. Well, I want to tell you about an awesome new book that clearly went above and beyond to bring you the kind of dinosaur content that will make your dinosaur-loving heart very happy indeed. And to tell you a little bit more about it, I have a person that loves books and dinosaurs more than anyone I know. My son, Owen. And while he's only 11, he finished all of the Harry Potter books and Percy Jackson books while he was in the 2nd grade. He has read and enjoyed both Jurassic Park books. He reads books faster than we can get to the library to get more. It's bonkers. And his current career ambition is to become a paleogeneticist. So if his opinion is not good enough for you, well, I don't know what you're looking for.
Well, hi there. As my dad just explained, my name is Owen, and just recently I got the opportunity to read this stinkin' rad book, The Saurian Rangers. As a big dinosaur fan, something that is very important to me in all dinosaur pop culture is that the dinosaurs are accurate. So that is something that I was really looking for as I was reading this book. And I must say, they did an amazing job. They went into great detail with the descriptions of the dinosaurs and did a very accurate and realistic job portraying them. They even focused on details I hadn't previously considered, such as how the dinosaurs' color and pattern may have changed as they aged. From more camouflage juvenile coloration to more colorful display colorations as adults. There are quite a few characters in the book, each with their own distinct points of view, and yet the authors were very consistent with the switch from the entire book is presented in the present tense, unlike the past tense where I encountered most books that I read. Reading in the present tense gave me a very different It felt like I was there with the characters, instead of interviewing them about something that happened in the past. Overall, I highly recommend this book. It gives you a deep experience with your favorite dinosaurs and characters that come to life individually, each in different ways.
And if Saurian Rangers seems like stuff to read, well, I have great news, because for the next 30 days, if you follow our link, you can save 10% off the paperback and 20% off the Kindle edition. You can enjoy it for a little bit less. Again, that's 10% off the paperback and 20% off Kindle for the next 30 days. We'll have links down in the description. Thank you again to Saurian Rangers for sponsoring this video. When it comes to care, I'm pretty sure we're going to end up at a 0 also. But I'm not sure. Okay, so I hate to talk to you, but can you share with us a little bit what you know about the range sizes of Tyrannosaurus Rex in the wild, like how large of a territory they are, and what you think the minimum space that you could see Tyrannosaurus Rex in?
There was a paper that actually answered this, and not specifically to fit a T-Rex in a cage, but just about T-Rex territories, and it was a paleo-ecological system. And we're looking at the whole broad ecosystem of Hell Creek and Lance Formation. Originally from, not for just kidding. But this suggested that there were about 3 T-Rexes spread out across an area roughly the size of DC. DC is around 70 square miles. So if we divide the parcel out into 3 quadrants, or I guess 3 parcels, tertiles, you would require over 23 square miles of
Okay, so square mile. That's probably their natural territory.
Exactly. That's staked out natural territory. So that's our best guess as to how big you have to enclose a T-Rex into.
At least if it was going to have enough prey. Now, if you were supplying food to it,
that's the hard part, is we don't understand too much about T-Rex behavior, and especially in the wild. And so we have no idea what kind of stresses shrinking that might cause to them. It is a space requirement or a territory requirement as opposed to a prey dragon. So, but that's our best guess, 23 square miles of a T-Rex. At least if you want a house rabbit.
perfect. Okay, so T-Rex live in North America. I'm curious what you know about kind of what the climate is, as well as the atmosphere, and how these things might impact the possibility of keeping T-Rex alive now, and also where we could potentially house them outdoors year round.
So, much like a lot of modern animals, especially endophiles, T-Rex could handle a good variety of things. It was a pretty hardy unit. But you don't want to keep it or anywhere with high extremes. It wouldn't fare well in the Sahara Desert. It wouldn't fare well in Antarctica, right?
Okay.
So what we're looking at is, in its natural ecosystem, we're looking at something pretty similar to the Florida Everglades. A lot of fluvial plains, rivers, marshes, swamps, and even similar to kind of the climate that we find in Florida. Now, we're going to find more sequoias, redwoods, pines, and a lot of low-lying shrubs in this environment than we see and we're also going to see a severe lack of grass and flowers, because those are right at the end of the rotation, right when T-Rex showed up. So they're relatively new climates, and so they were a lot less predetermined species. And as far as the climate, we're seeing something pretty similar to today's climate, just again in more of a tropical area. A little bit more oxygen than most areas.
By a little bit.
If I remember correctly, around 10%.
Okay.
But, however, T-Rex also had a much more powerful respiratory system than us. So T-Rex fared well to the climate. And we want to make sure, especially when you come up, it gets a little bit T-Rex. We do see a really wide geographic range of T-Rex, as far north as Canada, and south as Mexico, all across the South. And even though it was 66 million years ago, the northernmost regions of the country probably experience at least some point throughout the year. And the most southernmost range definitely experience severe heat. However, again, these are probably stressful times for T-Rex. And things that can wear through, however, not something that you want to keep your T-Rex.
Probably tropical.
Exactly. Nice warm climates. Talking the range of anywhere between low 60 degrees to high 80s. It's probably ideal for a T-Rex.
Maybe
That would be great, as long as we can get a little bit more redwoods and pine weather. Something, maybe 80 miles east of that island. There was a second site.
Okay, so assuming we have enough space in a part of the world that would be habitable for a T-Rex, how much food are we talking about every day?
Well, that is a great question, and you must be a Scottish millionaire or something food service, because that is a lot of money to afford space. But if we are going that route, that is a phenomenal question, because adults, based off most recent studies, ate 140 kilograms of meat a day. That is over 300 pounds every day. So that's a lot of goats. I mean, I don't know exactly how big a goat is, but 40, 50 pounds, so that's over 6 goats a day.
6 goats a day, okay.
And hatchlings, again, because they were so much smaller, likely needed about a cheeseburger's weight of meat every single day. But like we talked about earlier, that would change as it goes. Pretty soon, I think you find yourself. Now, they would double in weight at first every week, eventually every month.
So it's doubling in this first week. So you had a small dog, and now you got a medium-sized dog a week later.
Exactly.
Okay.
So suddenly we're seeing this rapid growth, and it's starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, eventually, in the first few years of its life, in the first 5 to 8 years, you've already got roughly the size of a large saltwater crocodile. So now you're starting to go into some issues with feeding, space, all of that stuff. It's time to move on to T-Rex enclosure and start with that, and also grow an extra goat in there too. Now it's going to continue to grow really rapidly, because we're going to continue on that growth curve, but as it gets bigger, it's going to slow down a little bit, because it's hard to put on that much exponential weight that quickly. So in another decade, anywhere between 14 to 17, you have a near mature size. So you have a near 40-foot long, 10 to monster on it. So basically, your pet is twice the size of an animal. Now, after that, they would continue to be indeterminate growth, much like modern crocodiles. That means that they were just continuously growing, just at a much slower rate throughout the entire life of their body. Now, the lifespan of the T-Rex, it's pretty long, but luckily not quite as long as modern caribou. It won't outlast you. You only have to worry about your monster of a pet until it's about 40 years old. You live fast and you die young.
So you've got a very small animal for a few, and then a few years later you've got something that's the size of an adult, gigantic saltwater crocodile, except it doesn't stay in the water. It can be anywhere you can go.
And it's got a metabolic rate that could keep up with more than yours, rather than a saltwater crocodile that can go months without.
Yeah, okay. So something the size of a saltwater crocodile that's way more dangerous than a saltwater crocodile. And, within the lifespan of a dog, it is a full-size 40-foot Tyrannosaurus Rex. And you're going to have that for the next 25 years.
That is the size of your house.
Okay, all right.
Now, in the prehistoric environment of T-Rex, it ate things you came across. It would eat Triceratops, Torosaurus, Ankylosaurus, Edmontosaurus, Spinosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus. Now, there's even a coprolite to a T-Rex, the largest coprolite ever found. And inside there was even a cat-sized pterodactyl. So obviously just snapped something out of the air. So what that shows us is T-Rex was highly opportunistic. And again, that means that that's not very good for us. It means that if that T-Rex forgets about that social bond it has, or if they're not as social as we might think they are, suddenly, once again, you're a pretty bite-sized snack.
But it does mean we can find some.
Exactly. That does mean that they're not picky eaters. And so it's most likely goats, cows, or anything else that might be preying on them. Because I'm not sure how close we want to get to the
Well, assume that it was spaceport in the right part of the world, and we're defeated. There's an option would their sociality require more?
So this is a complicated question, and again, the part about T-Rex biology and behavior that we don't know very little about. Now, we can look at other tyrannosaurs that are their behavior in the wild. There's a site where they found 40 Albertosaurs, all washed up in potentially a flash flood. Now, Albertosaurus was substantially smaller than T-Rex, and really, it was obviously a Tyrannosaur, but it wasn't that closely related. It wasn't even one of the kind of T-Rex's, like, sister taxons. And so, it's a little hard to compare them, but we do have evidence of at least some Tyrannosaurs being apparently highly social, to the point where they had this massive horde of them.
Yes.
Now, I imagine even Albertosaurus were probably more gregarious, similar to what you see in Komodo dragons, in that it's not really a highly organized or hierarchical pack structure. Instead, it's all kind of just an angry mob of big, scary reptiles that kind of just mob prey and then fight for dominance amongst each other. But those guys are more removed from T-Rex than, say, a lion and a tiger is, and we see highly different behaviors between lions and tigers. Now, the other argument for T-Rex is that we do know that it was an cannibalistic. We have pretty much every adult T-Rex skull has been found with bite marks inflicted by another T-Rex. We call that intraspecific combat, meaning it fought with members of the same species. Every adult T-Rex skull is found with those bite marks. Some are healed, some are unhealed. Now, this suggests that they were fighting to the death, and the winner would be the loser. So, even if they were social, which we don't necessarily have evidence for, that means that you might start with a pack and eventually end up with one anyways. And if they're not, they were highly aggressive towards each other. Because again, Komodo dragons do live in large groups, and they are aggressive towards each other. But also don't have evidence of T-Rex.
Attention all personnel. Our weather reports have identified an approaching storm. Please await further instructions.
Several Triceratops or several Porosaurs, implicating that they died in these kind of mass events. Exactly. Yet we only find one T-Rex. So I have a sneaking suspicion that T-Rex was pretty solitary. And maybe
attention all personnel. Our weather forecast has been updated. The storm warning level has been raised.
They really seek each other out because they loved mating. And they were basically hunting each other down because odds are you get a better territory and
attention all personnel. Please proceed to cover.
So sociality is definitely something that you may want to tread lightly on and see how your T-Rex does by itself, because it is most likely.
That if you were trying to contain a tyrannosaur, you would not rely exclusively on an electrified fence, especially a fence that it could effortlessly snap on an island where the supply of electricity may not be 100% dependable. This is not a place to spare an expense. You would never even attempt to contain a bear this way, let alone a 40-foot super bear. Zoological facilities all over the world contain large, dangerous animals, but moats and other impenetrable physical barriers are used. Okay, so Ethan, can you talk to us about the speed, jumping ability, and just other factors about Tyrannosaurus rex that might be relevant when it comes to attempting to contain one?
Absolutely. So let's talk about what you're facing down first.
Yes.
Now, speed estimates of T-Rex range somewhat wildly. Some have gone as high as 45 or 50 miles per hour. Some are as low as 10 miles per hour. Now, odds are we're talking more in the range of anywhere between 15 to 25 miles per hour. Now, that is still faster than pretty much any human.
Mm-hmm.
So you definitely don't want it to get out, because it could chase you down pretty easily.
Yes. No, I don't see a scenario where a T-Rex is hunting you and you live.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you have a really good bunker.
Yes.
But luckily, unlike Acrocanthosaurus, which we discussed last week, it probably could not jump. T-Rex is the most massive land carnivore that has ever lived, at least that we know of. And so that means that it comes with a drawback of probably not being able to throw itself off the ground.
Yes.
Now, it could, unfortunately, most likely have some climbing ability, because most animals do have some. Now, I can't imagine T-Rex scaling a mountain,
No,
but things like
some
going up
complication.
cobbled hills or anything like that that is just kind of upwards rough terrain, I imagine wouldn't be too much of a problem for a T-Rex. Now, it would have to navigate that more carefully, again, because of its massive size, but I think it could still navigate that. So when we're talking about a barrier that you want to make sure is T-Rex proof, nothing it could get its mouth around is the answer.
Okay.
No cables, no steel bars, nothing like that, because T-Rex had potentially the strongest bite force of any animal to have ever lived. The current estimates range anywhere between
Ground
5 to 9 tons. Now that is an insane amount of force. American alligator bites down with about what, 1 ton of force?
If that, yes.
Yeah.
So.
And a car crusher uses 2 tons to completely flatten cars. And that's not even the newer estimates that are ranging potentially as much as 3 times that. That would make it the strongest bite force not just of any land animal, but the strongest bite force of any animal ever. So that means you do not want to, even with metal, have any sort of fencing that T-Rex can get its mouth off, because odds are that bite force is strong enough to crunch right through it. And the teeth are adapted for that bite force. In fact, the entire anatomy of the skull is the teeth are super deeply rooted. In fact, they can root over 6 inches deeper into the skull, twice the length of the crown. Now, the entirety of T-Rex teeth, and even just general T-Rex skull anatomy, is built to withstand and deal that bite force out. This is a T-Rex tooth slid out of the skull, and you can see that over half of it is just meant to be rooted inside the skull. Over half of that is just meant to be stuck up inside the skull and absorbing all that bite. Now, not only that, but if you look, the teeth are conical. They're almost, in paleontology, we actually nickname these murder bananas.
Yes.
Because they're thick and round, and they're not necessarily sharp. The serrations are huge, but again, this isn't something you could easily stab yourself with.
No.
Because if it was, that means the tooth would snap under all that pressure. These things are railroad spikes meant for crushing bone and ripping chunks out of other dinosaurs. So it could pretty easily bite through any sort of man-made fencing that we have that it can get its mouth around. And then the rest of the skull is all built to just absorb that force throughout the rest of it. If you look, you can see all these not fully fused sutures that run through all the bones. Now, at first, you'd think that might weaken the bite. Because crocodiles, who have the strongest bite today, have a fully fused skull. However, the most recent research is suggesting that actually aids the bite force, because it helps reverberate force through the entire skull, because physics says whatever force is dealt out will be dealt back, right? And so if all of that has a little bit of plasticity in it, that allows it to absorb the bite force like a rubber band. Exactly. And not to mention, T-Rex was also biting down with its neck muscles. Its entire neck musculature was all built to snap forward and slam those jaws shut with potentially the most powerful bite of any animal to have ever lived. So this is not an animal you want getting out. So what that means is you want heavily reinforced walls, potentially concrete with metal running through them with deep foundation, and then surround it with a moat just to be safe. Any other physical barriers also don't hurt. And while you're at it, just for fun, throw some electricity in. And one point of reference, because I've seen the 4th Jurassic movie, no giant doors with interior access. No doors the size of a T-Rex that can be accessed from the inside. That's just a quick tip that might save a couple lives.
Okay, so it's my understanding that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a brawler. I think you've explained this a little bit already, but it hunted and fought with some of the most formidable land animals that ever existed, and often sustained and survived some grievous injuries. So I'm really, really tempted to give them a 5 out of 5 for hardiness, but I'd really like your assessment.
I think that is an absolutely correct assessment. Now, if these guys obviously are no longer with us, your T-Rex will probably look something more like this. Now yours might have a little more covered teeth, lips, a little bit more fuzz. We're not entirely sure, but it'll probably look somewhere in this ballpark. Now, as you can see, T-Rex was a bruiser. It was like the pitbull or the linebacker of dinosaurs. It was absolutely meant for grappling and taking down other dinosaurs. Like you said, it was just 10 tons of raw muscle and power. Now, with living with some of the most formidable dinosaurs in its environment and having to fight off other T-Rex on a daily basis, like you said, that means it survived some very gnarly injuries. Even Dynamo here, in fact, here's one of Dynamo's real teeth. I'm going to show you something like this. Now, this tooth, if you can see, there's pathology in this skull right here. You see that? And that hole is clear through the skull.
Wow.
Now, that hole lines up perfectly with the tip of another T-Rex's tooth. So that is inflicted from another T-Rex who bit through the top of his snout and gave him 3 nose piercings.
That's awesome.
Now, he also has other really gnarly pathologies on his cheek that line up with these front 4 teeth from another T-Rex, and it actually crunched right through and had drag marks where his teeth was grinding into the skull as he was trying to pull out of the bite. And he also was missing an eye, most likely. This is a pathology right above his eye socket right here, and we see it drag across his orbit exactly where his eye would have been. So he was potentially blind in one eye. And our best guess, yes, and our best guess is that was from a Triceratops. So everything about T-Rex was just dealt to deal pain. But the problem is, T-Rex loved pain. In fact, other specimens, like Stan, have even had damage to the brain cases. Other T-Rex teeth embedded inside it.
And you were telling me part of his brain case was ripped off.
We see a really gnarly pathology that suggests that at one point, that part of the brain case was ripped off. His brain may have even been partially exposed for a little while, which is insane to think about. Now, there are other tyrannosaurs who we've seen with broken chins, damaged pubises, and all kinds of gnarly pathology. Another T-Rex even had part of its tail ripped off by another T-Rex. All of these animals live to tell the tale.
And you can tell that because they show signs of healing.
We can see the scar tissue on the bones. So T-Rex was absolutely a hardy animal. We even have evidence of them surviving things like cancer, parasites, and all kinds of diseases. T-Rex is absolutely a hardy animal. Now, I don't recommend subjecting your T-Rex to any of these things. However, like I said, T-Rex love pain, so it just do it. So T-Rex is absolutely, that is one thing you don't have to worry about with Tyrannosaurus. It's absolutely a 5 out of 5.
Alright, well, with that in mind, given that 5, I recognize that they didn't survive the KT extinction, but if something like that happened today, make it even. And Tyrannosaurus rex survived as a species for a lot longer than we have. But as a pet, assuming that you give it enough to eat and don't spare expenses on the other things that it needs, there probably isn't much that would kill it. When it comes to availability, this is another place where Tyrannosaurus rex is going to lose some points. In fact, as of right now, if you want T-Rex, this is really the only way to get it. And Ethan can help you get your hands on one. We'll even put his contact information in the description in case, you're into that kind of thing. And other than upfront costs being a little on the steep side, this is one of the best pets that you can get. Ethan will give us a few more details about that at the end of the video. However, if you want one in the flesh, better at least have an 18-minute window.
18 minutes and your company catches up on 10 years of research.
Maybe more. Maybe a lot more. In fact, Ethan, what would it take to actually bring that? And of the things that we need, what do we have already? And what do we still need? And how much closer are we now than we were in, say, 1993?
That's a great question. The answer is we understand more about DNA and cloning and all those things than we did in 1993. But with T-Rex themselves, we're more closer to the Now, we do have some soft tissue and potentially even DNA to T-Rex because we have found a T-Rex with medullary preserved. Now, that is a soft tissue that is only present in ovulating birds today. So that means that this was a gravid, at least, or potentially pregnant female T-Rex. But that doesn't mean that we should be owning one, because even if we have technical DNA, that doesn't mean it's viable. It doesn't mean it's survivable. In fact, DNA decays after about 1 million years, and we have no way of bringing it back. So
I like that you say that.
Yeah. So not only could we not bring back a T-Rex, we couldn't even bring back the mosquito that its blood is much of Now, that doesn't mean that we'll never get there, because I'm an optimist and I want to see one, but unfortunately it's probably not in our life. Fingers crossed though.
Fair enough. Okay, so we're going to give T-Rex in the flesh a score of 0 out of 5 for availability. But if you're happy with the cast, we can hook you up right now. And it doesn't have to be a T-Rex. Yes. When it comes to upfront costs, you're going to have a lot. Obviously, research costs. Millions of dollars you're going to need to spend on research, if it's even possible to get the DNA, learn to clone a Tyrannosaurus. And then, of course, should you achieve that, then you've got the problem of the static enclosure, which is a 23 square miles with serious concrete or other ridiculously strong barriers and moats all around it.
And the enrichment within that enclosure.
Of course,
to make sure
of course.
T-Rex doesn't get bored.
Yes. And then you're going to need food. Now that's not all up front, but it's going to be a considerable recurring cost. Insurance, attorneys, who knows what all you're going to need. It's going to be very, very expensive. That said, you can charge anything you want. $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it. So your upfront costs will be high, but your ROI might make it all work out in the end. Just be sure to spare no expense. So we're going with 0 here too. Might offset. And this is why, overall, we give the Tyrannosaurus Rex, Giant Lizard King, a score of 1.0 out of 5. A terrible score for a terrible lizard. But still a better score than we gave to children. Tyrannosaurus Rex is a slightly better pet than a human child. If you want to know why, you should watch that video next. But not before Ethan fills us in on how this baby T-Rex is rewriting much about what we know about Tyrannosaurus.
Now, as I told you earlier, Chomper was reconstructed off of the T-Rex. Now, what's so cool about it is proving that he might be a lot closer to a Tyrannosaurus Rex specimen that we have been attributing to Jurassic all these years.
So we had specimens that we thought were Tyrannosaurus Rex.
That's baby.
He's showing us
He's showing that
same
that might not be
Okay.
entirely correct. So we're going to need to continue to do research. But Chomper here is definitely
if I understand correctly, if those other small organisms that we previously thought Tyrannosaurus Rex are not, then they must be
something else, which a lot of you might not be familiar with.
and I know that you're not allowed to talk about all of this just yet.
Not yet.
But there is research published as soon as it is.
You're going to be we'll talk to
All
Rex
right.
one day again.
Alright, so if you don't already subscribe, now might be the time to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. Happy Dinosaur December!
Now, if you guys are interested in getting your own T-Rex or anything else that you guys see on my website, any of my casts specifically, not any of my fossil jewelry or any of my real fossils, those are typically one of one. However, again, my casts are casts, they're replicas, I can form more of them. Now, if it says out of stock on my website, it will still allow you to purchase them. That's because, again, don't purchase the real fossils. However, again, the casts, go ahead and feel free to purchase, because that just means I haven't gotten one in backstock yet. That means that when I get an order, I'll custom pour one of those casts. Just expect a little bit longer of a turnaround time. closer to 4 to 5 weeks instead of the 1 to 2 weeks that it typically takes to raise. So please go on to primordialcustoms.com. That is my website. Those are all specimens I've worked on. You get an info card and typically a hardwood stand that comes with your fossil or your cast. And it's a great way to support me, and hopefully I can have some of that stuff here in this reptile register soon.
That'll be awesome. That'll be awesome. So remember, you can't order.
Sold out real fossils.
Yeah, you can't order a real fossil that doesn't exist, but you can order a cast that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly.
All right.
I have barrels full of dinosaurs, I promise.
And if this hasn't been quite enough nerding out about Tyrannosaurus Rex for you, well, we have a whole extra video for our patrons on Patreon. So if you'd like to check that out, please consider supporting us.
Okay, I have some bad news. The boom mic has slowly been inching.
Yes. I feel like I've been looking through it for a while.
A lot of pets require licenses. Does this qualify under any license?
I think this would require the most licenses and the most zoning.
Well, hi there. This is Giganotosaurus, one of the largest theropod dinosaurs ever discovered, and arguably the biggest carnivore the world has ever seen. On land, I mean, other than the one we covered last year, and the one we covered before. But it's close. Close enough that the title is still sometimes debated by paleontologists. And good news! I have one here with me today who specializes in large theropods and who can give us his 2 cents. But biggest or not, Giganotosaurus was certainly among the largest terrestrial carnivores that we know to have ever existed. But I realize that there is much that most people, myself included, and at least until recently, don't know about Giganotosaurus. Like how to pronounce its name. And as little as most of us know about Giganotosaurus, I bet that we know even less about its closest relatives, like what they are, and are all large. So it seems like the right way to start this Dinosaur December by digging into this awesome, but often poorly known group of largely South American super predators. And we'll begin with Giganotosaurus itself. Giganotosaurus probably has one of the more hotly debated names when it comes to pronunciation. I mean, is it 1.21 gigawatts or 1.21 gigawatts? 1.21 gigawatts. Is it a gig or a jig? Is it Giganotosaurus or Giganotosaurus? Well, this is Rodolfo Corey. He's one of the paleontologists who named it. So, how does he say it? Giganotosaurus. So we'll go with that. However, 99 million years ago, it was simply known as the most terrifying creature in all of South America, which was, at that time, already somewhat isolated from the other land masses that comprised Gondwana. Spinosaurus was alive at this time, but in Africa. Tyrannosaurus rex was not in South America either, and it wouldn't come into existence for more than 20 million years. And its ancestors that were alive at this time were nowhere near as large as Giganotosaurus. So Giganotosaurus was likely the most terrifying creature on land at that time, maybe anywhere on Earth. The Spinosaurus were capable of eating terrestrial prey, but those jaws were really specialized for catching fish, like the jaws of a carrier. However, these jaws, the jaws of Giganotosaurus, were specialized for something completely different, and different from Tyrannosaurus rex as well. These teeth and jaws specialized in slicing out large pieces of flesh. The teeth themselves are like knives meters long. That's 43 feet. Its exact weight is difficult to estimate, but it may have been as much as 13,800 kilos, which would be more than many estimates for Tyrannosaurus rex, though most estimates do not come anywhere near that size. And since we have a paleontologist with us who specializes in large theropods, let's have him tell us a little bit more about the amazing biology of Giganotosaurus. If there's one lesson that we can learn from Giganotosaurus, it's that if you don't change fast enough, and that applies not only to awesome animals, but also to careers. And if you feel like now might be the time that you need to make a change, let me introduce you to boot.dev. Boot.dev makes learning
You're joking.
development
This wastes all my time making a wave.
You're not studying boring slides and discussing theoretical simulations. You're progressing through levels, earning experience points, and completing quests. It's hands-on from day one, so you're constantly coding and solving real problems. And if you ever feel stuck or just need a nudge in the right direction, there's Boots, the AI bear wizard. Boots uses a super clever question-based approach to help you understand concepts more deeply instead of just handing you the answers. Plus, if you need even more support, Boot.dev's Discord community is always there to cheer you on. You'll learn Python and Go programming from start to finish, and it's all designed to keep you motivated, having fun, feel rewarded, it's getting seriously job ready. So if you're ready to start your coding adventure, level up your skills, click the link below and find your plans. 25% off the first month, or you can get 25% off for a whole year if you select the annual plan. With Boot.dev's 30-day refund policy, there's no risk in giving it a shot. Thank you, Boot.dev, for sponsoring this video, and happy programming.
Hi, I'm Ethan, and I'm a paleontologist that looks after and studies large theropods. So, Giganotosaurus, I say Giganotosaurus because it's too embarrassing for me to say Giganotosaurus, even though I'm technically wrong, was one of the largest land predators ever. Like you said earlier, it hit over 40 feet and it was a huge animal, easily one of the biggest carnivores we've ever seen. Giganotosaurus was pretty much similar to all the other carcharodontosaurs that have the basic body plan that we expect of a carcharodontosaurus, which is a long and elegant V-shaped skull, especially if you look at the top right there. You can see it's a V-shaped skull. Prominent lacrimal horns, which are the and then a really rugose structure over the snout along the nasals, which is basically the ridge of the snout. And that'll have a really rough and bumpy texture, especially in the bones, meaning this was all supposedly some sort of display structure accompanied or some kind of ornament. It also had a very long head with reduced forearms, not quite as reduced as what we see in Tyrannosaurus, but pretty reduced compared to its predecessors, like Allosaurus. It had a long muscular tail and was obviously bipedal, walked on two legs. On two powerful legs with clawed toes. And another diagnostic feature of the carcharodontosaurs are the blade-like teeth. That's what gives them the name sharp-toothed reptiles. Now that's a real carcharodontosaurus tooth, very similar to what you'd see in Giganotosaurus. It's, like you said, it's laterally compressed, meaning it's skinny, basically, and has a sharp recurve, meaning it curves back beyond the curvature of the base. And it has serrations on both sides. Now, if you compare this to a T-Rex tooth, for every 2 to 3 serrations on a Giganotosaurus or a Carcharodontosaurus tooth, you'd find 1 serration on a T-Rex. T-Rex's serrations are substantially larger. That's because these teeth are blades, like you said. These are steak knives. All of Carcharodontosaurus' jaws were these long, elegant weapons of mass destruction. They were essentially giant serrated scissors, meant for slicing flesh and ripping off strips. And so these teeth, you can see, are perfect examples of that. Now, the back of the jaw would have been a lot more flared out, like you see here, and then have a much more straight curve along until we get this powerful chin, which was probably kind of an aerodynamics thing that allowed it to snap shut and shear off flesh with ease. And that's actually how they get the nickname hatchet jaw from the Carcharodontosaurus, because it's shaped sort of like a hatchet. Now, all of this is not built for pure power, like say T-Rex's jaws were. They were built for slicing off those pieces of flesh. And then at the front of the jaw, maxillary teeth. discs, which are in the very front bone and the snout. These are going to be a little bit fatter, and these are actually probably feeding teeth, meaning they would likely, a lot like modern-day raptors, step on prey and rip off tiny sheared pieces because their teeth weren't in the processing bone that tyrannosaurs were probably inside. And so they would rip off these nice, pristine strips of flesh and swallow those instead. And just like in what we see in Allosaurus, who had very similar teeth to this, just on a smaller scale, we actually can see feeding marks in their ecosystem pretty regularly, where the teeth are just slightly scraping the edge of the bone as they're cleaning off the flesh. And so that is kind of how Carcharodontosaurus and Giganotosaurus ate. As far as how it hunted, our only reference for that is actually Acrocanthosaurus, which is a North American Carcharodontosaurus. And I think we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But that is our best guess. However, Acrocanthosaurus, and again we'll discuss that a little more at length, what our only evidence is this set of trackways. And it shows something that potentially only Acrocanthosaurus and its smaller relatives could have done, because Carcharodontosaurus, Giganotosaurus, Tyrannotitan, and Mapusaurus were all larger. But it does show that Acrocanthosaurus, and likely most Carcharodontosaurids, hunted sauropods, the huge long-necked dinosaurs, which is a pretty sweet claim to fame for this group. And Giganotosaurus did live with massive sauropods. Now, we don't know the exact species, but we have found its remains. Mapusaurus lived with the famous Argentinosaurus, but Giganotosaurus was a little bit earlier. And we have found sauropod remains of similar size to Argentinosaurus, and probably it was almost certainly Argentinosaurus' ancestor. So we know that Giganotosaurus was likely feeding on the same sauropods. And what's interesting is we can also look at things like Allosaurus and other predecessors to Carcharodontosaurids and see that there's potential for them being gregarious or social, meaning that even Giganotosaurus and the other giant Carcharodontosaurids may have actually been social animals living in groups. So that is kind of your intro into Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurids in general.
There's one thing worse than having a Giganotosaurus chasing you.
It's several. Exactly.
So that's Giganotosaurus. Clearly an incredibly rad dinosaur. But what are its close relatives? Well, as we discussed last Dinosaur December in our video about all of the theropods, Giganotosaurus falls into the clade Allosauridia, which is nested in the larger clade Carnosauria. So these are Allosauroid carnosaurs, a group characterized, as Ethan explained, by significant head crests. So Giganotosaurus is more closely related to Allosaurus than they are to other large theropods like Spinosaurus or Tyrannosaurus rex. Heck, Tyrannosaurus rex was likely more closely related to a parrot than it is to Giganotosaurus. Not that it was that closely related to a parrot. But the closest relatives of Giganotosaurus are all members of the family Carcharodontosauridae, the shark-toothed lizards. And those shark teeth are one of many skull features that make this group very distinctive from the similarly sized tyrannosaurids that we discussed last year. Tyrannosaurid skulls were built for crushing. They had strong, heavy skulls and rounded, banana-shaped teeth that could handle bone-crushing bite force. Carcharodontosaurid skulls, on the other hand, are light, with a huge antorbital fenestra, which is this hole right here, as well as other large fenestrae. These openings are enormous. The lower jaw is super blunt in the front, at least when viewed from the side, especially compared to other similarly sized dinosaurs like the Tyrannosaurids. As a whole, it is much thinner, but shaped like a hatchet handle, dropping down right before the end and then sweeping back up at a dramatic angle. And their teeth are super different. Like Ethan explained, instead of having rounded spikes for teeth, they had flat, sharp, highly serrated teeth for shearing off flesh. But the head was not all that was different. When your head is much lighter, it means that other parts of your anatomy can be larger, such as your arms. These are still predators that focus on jaws as their primary weapon, but the arms of Carcharodontosaurids are noticeably larger than those of Tyrannosaurids, with the 3 fingers more typical of later theropods. Their hind legs are fairly similar in basic shape and proportion, though the 3rd metatarsal is not pinched off by the 2nd and 4th, as you see in Tyrannosaurids, so they have no arctometatarsus. Just 3 parallel metatarsals like most other theropods. And while we're comparing the 2 families, both have well, comparably enormous members as well as smaller members. How small exactly? We're about to discover. But whereas we have evidence that larger tyrannosaurids became large by growing more rapidly, it appears that Carcharodontosaurids grew larger by growing, well, for longer. Which probably explains why we didn't see a fully grown Giganotosaurus until the 6th Jurassic movie, but we've had adult T-Rexes since the first. Of course, there are only 2 Jurassic movies. I'll discuss why a little later this month. But the difference in growth rate is an interesting difference between Tyrannosaurus and Giganotosaurus that likely reflects many interesting attributes about the environmental conditions in South America versus those in North America during the Cretaceous. So which shark-toothed lizard was the closest relative to Giganotosaurus? Well, there seems to be pretty much universal agreement that the answer is this creature, Mapusaurus.
Giganotosaurus means giant reptile from the south.
Mapusaurus means earth lizard in Mapuche and Greek. But it sounds like something that you might find inside of a bottle that would take you to a treasure trove of coprolites. I mean, it's all well and good that you wanted to use a word in the language of the indigenous people that live in the region where it was found. I get it. But they could have called it Tucapelsaurus, which would mean the lizard that takes by force. Now that's a name. And yes, it would put you in the mood for a chalupa, but you have to admit that it's a more fitting name for one of the most terrifying beasts that the land has ever known.
The moment that you have to decide the name of the dinosaur, because you have a huge responsibility on your shoulders. You know that if you are right in proposing a new genus, that name will be preserved in the future forever. Choosing a name for the dinosaurs is like bringing a new baby to the world, a big baby.
But so far it seems like Carcharodontosaurid researchers are they're as bad at bringing babies into the world as Spinosaurid researchers. I guess they can't all study Tyrannosaurids, can they, Ethan? So how does the earth lizard compare to the giant reptile from the south? Well, it turns out that they are both giant reptiles from the south, and they're also both from Earth. In fact, this earth lizard is very nearly the same size as its cousin, growing to sizes in excess of 12 meters and likely weighing between 3,000 and 6,000 kilos, which is largely within the more widely accepted estimated range for Giganotosaurus of 4,200 to like 13,800 kilos. So smaller, but maybe not much smaller. And given that most of the features that are used to identify Mapusaurus are missing from our fossils of Giganotosaurus, the only differences that we can verify are that Mapusaurus doesn't have a second opening in the quadrate bone, and the bumps on the nose are slightly different from those of Giganotosaurus. In other words, it's really, really similar to Giganotosaurus. And that's probably why their status as close relatives is not in doubt. And it appears that their closest relative has a right proper name, Tyrannotitan. The Tyrant Titan, which I think would be Cronus, who overthrew his own father, Uranus, in a violent rebellion, and then castrated him with a sickle that was given to him as a gift by his mother. He then imprisoned his siblings and ate his own children as they were born out of fear that they would do unto him as he had done unto his father. I guess what I'm saying is that even the Tyrannosaurid researchers gave this one a nod.
Oh, yeah.
But does Tyrannotitan live up to such a cool name? Well, let's start with size. Because as well as they did with this name, if it's like the size of a turkey, then suddenly it's ironic, not iconic. So Giganotosaurus is estimated to be between 12 and 13 meters long, and Tyrannotitan is estimated to be between 12.2 and 13 meters long, which might mean that Giganotosaurus is not only not the biggest carnivore the world has ever seen, not only not the largest carnivore the land has ever seen, not only not the largest theropod the land has ever seen, but not even the largest theropod that South America has ever seen, or even the largest Carcharodontosaurid that South America has ever seen. Because, at least in terms of length, Tyrannotitan might have been the true king. So what about mass? Well, most estimates put Tyrannotitan at 4,800 to 7,000 kilos, so potentially more massive than Giganotosaurus as well. Like Mapusaurus and Giganotosaurus, it was found in Argentina. But it's older than Giganotosaurus, living somewhere between 10 and 30 million years before Giganotosaurus. So it could actually be the direct ancestor of Giganotosaurus. And Mapusaurus as well, which is just a few million years younger than Giganotosaurus. So these are three giant Carcharodontosaurids from roughly the same location at three different times. It is not unreasonable to think that they could be the same lineage at three different times in its evolutionary history. But it is very difficult to draw that conclusion with much certainty from a few isolated skeletons. And these animals, unlike Tyrannosaurus rex, but much like many of the Spinosaurids, are known from very few skeletons. What we do know is that they're extremely similar, but not the same. As is common in Saurischian dinosaurs, all three of these colossal Carcharodontosaurids had pneumatic bones. Like Mapusaurus and Giganotosaurus, Tyrannotitan had pneumatic openings in its caudal vertebrae and its dorsal vertebrae. But unlike its possible descendants, Tyrannotitan had a gap in these pneumatic openings in its sacral vertebrae. So it had pneumatic openings in its back and tail, but not in its pelvis. At least not in the anterior region of its pelvis. This is possible because the dorsal regions of the skeleton and the caudal regions of the skeleton are pneumaticized by different parts of the respiratory system. Because the respiratory system was very different from your respiratory system and almost identical to the respiratory system of birds, which I'm finally going to explain a little later this month. Sorry for the long wait on that one. But because the air that pneumaticized their bones came from different regions of the respiratory system, it was possible to have gaps. In fact, such gaps are very common in juveniles where the pneumatic skeletons have not yet fully formed. And I have not heard that there is any suspicion that Tyrannotitan is a juvenile. But imagine if it was. Those three species form a clade known as the Giganotosaurini. Though sometimes an argument is made for including one more species called Meraxes that we will discuss later. But the most recent phylogenetic work on the Carcharodontosaurids suggests that the closest relative to the Giganotosaurini are the namesake of the entire family, Carcharodontosaurus, which you know is a cool name. It means shark-toothed lizards, or shark-toothed reptiles, depending on which translation of the suffix saurus you find to be the most accurate. Ethan, do you have any thoughts on this?
I feel about it the same way I feel about Giganotosaurus and Giganotosaurus. Technically,
You think there's a right and wrong?
I think there's a right and wrong,
Okay.
and I think I go with the more technically incorrect one. Lizard, I think, is the true direct Latin translation. However, I think in terms of scientific and just general nomenclature and how the public refers to it, reptile is more broadly accepted these days and the more common usage. When we use the suffix saurus now, I think that it is just mostly referring to reptiles. I think that's why we've continued to give the suffix saurus to so many dinosaurs, even well after knowing they're not lizards.
Here's a question I don't expect you to know the name and the answer to.
I could try.
In Latin, do you think there is a word for a group of animals that includes both lizards and crocodiles?
I'm not sure. I mean, where does reptilia come from?
Yeah.
Because that's Latin. So reptile might be that group.
Could be. Anyway, lizard or reptile, Carcharodontosaurus was one rad dinosaur. And, as you probably assumed, given that all three species that we've discussed so far are found in Argentina, which is in South America, Carcharodontosaurus was found in northern Africa. I know you saw that coming. More where we're used to finding Spinosaurids than relatives of Giganotosaurus, which has to play some part in the assessment that Meraxes, also of Argentina, would be a closer relative. But we'll get to them soon enough. Carcharodontosaurus, while potentially not quite as large as Giganotosaurus or Tyrannotitan, was not so much smaller that you would notice the difference if one was chasing you, coming in at 10 to 13 meters and weighing 4,000 to 7,000 kilos, though not all species in the genus were this large. However, the most recent phylogenetic analysis suggests that the other species may not even be part of this genus. Either way, if you were being chased by the largest species of Carcharodontosaurus, you'd probably only know that it wasn't Giganotosaurus because you're not in South America. But they did exist at about the same time, so neither of them is likely to be the ancestor of the other. I've read about other differences, like Carcharodontosaurus having a longer but less robust head than Giganotosaurus, with shorter arms, but I'm not confident that any of this is true. Have you heard anything about this?
I think that it's honestly potentially even the opposite. I've seen both Giganotosaurus, at least cast material, and real material to Carcharodontosaurus, and Carcharodontosaurus to me seems to have a little more heft, and honestly the one I've worked on was larger than the Giganotosaurus material, suggesting to me that it was actually a larger animal, and I think Carcharodontosaurus, in my personal opinion, is probably the contender for the largest of the Carcharodontosaurids.
And that's who we have here.
That's
right?
who we have here. This is the lower jaw to Carcharodontosaurus, and this dentary up to about this point was all real, and it's obviously a very substantial animal. In fact, this skull clocks in at nearly 6 feet in length. It's a huge, huge skull.
For reference, how long is a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull?
The T-Rex skulls max out at a little over 5 feet.
So that's longer.
Longer than T-Rex. Not quite as wide, or even Carcharodontosauruses aren't quite as heavily built, but still longer, and that's nothing to sneeze at. And so I think Carcharodontosaurus is a very strong contender for the largest of the Carcharodontosaurids.
Just keeps getting worse for Giganotosaurus. Most of the other differences that I can verify seem to be extremely small.
And that seems to be something that we see across the entire clade, is that there's pretty minute differences from even genera to genera, let alone species to species. They all seem to have a lot of very strong similarities to each other, even more than what we expect in typical theropod clades.
Very cool. I just want to say, if you love dinosaurs and you love seeing dinosaur nerds geek out about dinosaurs, then the Patreon extras video for this one is probably the greatest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. And if you would like to see that, go ahead and check out our Patreon.
Especially if you hate one dinosaur in specific.
Yes. Now, phylogenies based on limited fossil evidence are always in flux. It is much harder to draw strong conclusions about relatedness when you don't have molecular evidence, much information about soft tissue, or even an entire skeleton to study. So a case can be made that Meraxes, that we've already mentioned and that we will discuss, as well as the other one, Taurovenator, belong to the clade most closely related to the Giganotosaurus. Perhaps others as well. But it seems that we're pretty confident that at least these 4 genera are part of the subfamily Carcharodontosaurinae, the subfamily of Giganotosaurus. And as of right now, it seems that the next closest relative of Giganotosaurus is actually 4 different genera that are all part of a separate clade. They are thus all more closely related to one another than they are to anything we've discussed so far, and are all equally related to Giganotosaurus, since the last time that they shared ancestors with Giganotosaurus, they were all the same thing. They diversified from each other later on. So let's find out just who they are. Because so far, everything that we've looked at has either been Giganotosaurus or something almost identical of nearly the same size, if not even larger. And of the members of this clade, the member least closely related to all of the rest, assuming, of course, that the other current member of the genus Carcharodontosaurus isn't its closest relative, would be the genus Meraxes, that we've already discussed a few times today. Again, this one might be in the Carcharodontosaurinae, but if not, it seems to go over here. And you'd think we'd have a pretty good handle on it. This is one of the most complete Carcharodontosaurid specimens that we have ever found. But I guess not. It was just described 2 years ago, so hopefully it will become less of a mystery in time. So what's with this name? Well, Meraxes was the name of the dragon ridden by Queen Rhaenys Targaryen. You know, during Aegon's conquest. In the novel series A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. The books that were later adapted into Game of Thrones. You might have heard of it. So it's kind of a big deal. Meraxes was named after a god, you know, and could swallow a whole horse. So it's cool. It's a cool name. Not nerdy at all, Tyrannosaurid researchers, so back off. And while this Meraxes might not be able to choke down a whole horse, it was somewhere between 9 and about 12.5 meters long and probably weighed over 4,000 kilos. So, you know, there are probably some horses that it could swallow. And I'll be honest, even though Meraxes is smaller than its cousins from the other clade, it might be my favorite dinosaur that we've discussed so far. I mean, what makes Giganotosaurus cooler than the other Carcharodontosaurians? I've got nothing. It might be the biggest. Might. But does it have a big old velociraptor toe claw? No, it does not. Does Meraxes? Yes, it does. Does Giganotosaurus have big old spines on its vertebrae like many of the Spinosaurids? No, it does not. Does Meraxes? Yes, it does. Did it have horn-like protuberances on its head? Yeah, probably some, but not as many as Meraxes. This is like some sort of Dr. Wu abomination, except it's real. So unless you love feathers and huge spindly long arms, which Carcharodontosaurids of course have abandoned in favor of huge jaws and giant body size, then this has to be a real contender for your new favorite dinosaur. And Meraxes was living in Argentina at about the same time as Giganotosaurus, and doing just fine, thank you very much. In fact, the holotype for this species is the longest living non-avian theropod ever known to have lived. This specimen was estimated to have been between 39 and 53 years old when it died, having reached skeletal maturity only 4 years before its death. Remember, Carcharodontosaurids grow large by growing long, not by growing quickly, which probably meant that not many things were killing them. So this is one rad dragon. But before you declare it to be your new favorite dinosaur, we'd better get to know its closest relatives. Who knows? Maybe they're even cooler. But they better shoot fire or fly or bake really good cookies or something, because this is one tough act to follow. But assuming that some of the fossils currently attributed to the genus Carcharodontosaurus do not actually belong to a yet undescribed closest relative of Meraxes, then the other three members of this clade would all be equally related to this shark-toothed, short-armed super raptor slash baryonyx hybrid. And of those three, the genus least closely related to the other two appears to be the genus Lahaspinator, which, as we've learned in the past, venator means hunter. So what does it hunt? Apparently the town of Las Lajas in Argentina, which seems lame, but hunting a whole town is a pretty Godzilla move, so it's not the worst name ever. But I know the question on all of your minds. Could it swallow a horse? And the answer is, it would have to be a really small horse. Lahaspinator is a Carcharodontosaurid that is smaller than Utahraptor. Heck, it's smaller than Deinonychus, which wasn't even as big as they were depicted in the 2 Jurassic Park movies that are legitimate, or the 4 illegitimate other movies with Jurassic in their names. This is among the smallest of all Allosaurids. They were only around 2.9 meters long. It's hard to say how much it weighed, probably more than you, but probably closer to what you weigh than to anything else that we've discussed today, until now. This is dainty. Also from Argentina, it didn't coexist with anything else that we've discussed because it lived much earlier, probably 132 to 138 million years ago. So probably 30 million years before Giganotosaurus. So by the time that Giganotosaurus came around, Lahaspinator had already been gone for more years than what separate us from the earliest megalodons. And the gap between them and T-Rex is greater than the gap between you and T-Rex. So if giant beasts like Tyrannotitan, Mapusaurus, and Giganotosaurus represent the spectacular end of the line for the Carcharodontosaurids, Lahaspinator likely represents the more modest early days of the clade. But given that it could only swallow among the smallest horses in the world today, I know what you're wanting to know. Did it have a giant toe claw or a Spinosaurid sail? Maybe that frill that Dilophosaurus also didn't have. What Dr. Wu witchcraft does this mini shark tooth possess? And the answer is, for the most part, no, we don't know. It's tiny and old and clearly a Carcharodontosaurid, but we just described this guy in 2020, and there is just a lot of the skeleton that we don't have at this point in time. But you won't be confusing it with anything we've discussed so far. Its 2 closest relatives are the last 2 members of this clade, Labocania and Chauchelon. But I'm going to be honest with you, one of them might not even be a Carcharodontosaurid. It may not even be an Allosauroid. It might be more closely related to a duck than it is to Giganotosaurus. Or it might be one of Giganotosaurus' closest relatives, because phylogenetic analysis with fragmentary bone pieces is a nightmare. Good thing our local paleontologist specializes in the group to which it may belong, so at least we can get his opinion here in a minute. But right now, I want to talk about the one that we are more confident is related to Mini Godzilla, Chauchelon from China. Chauchelon means, It basically means Carcharodontosaurus, but in Mandarin, which is some weak communist baloney if you ask me. Listen, we name organisms in languages that we all don't speak. Naming them in the language that you actually speak, but nobody else does, is lame. I mean, if Ethan here ever discovers a new dinosaur and lets me name it, and I'm not going to call it Jurassic Park is the best movie ever, I'm going to learn how to say that in Greek or Latin or some combination of the two, or some obscure language spoken near where it was found, and then call it that. If I were really doing it right, I would actually name it after the most conspicuously unique feature and then translate that into Greek or Latin.
Testify.
But whatever. We'll all learn Mandarin like in Firefly. So the communist Carcharodontosaurus predates humanity's experiment with communism by somewhere between 72 and 94 million years. And like its cousin, it was not huge, coming in at around 5 to 6 meters in length. So bigger than La Spinator, but smaller than everything else we've discussed. And younger too. Probably weighing just around 500 kilos, but it was holding its own in Asia during the Middle Cretaceous. However, there is no sign of anything like them later on when the Tyrannosaurids really came to prominence in the area. While we're on the subject of Tyrannosaurids, let's talk about their closest relatives, Labocania, whose name comes from La Boca Roja, which is a Spanish name for the location in Baja California, Mexico, where it was found. In other words, the Carcharodontosaurid researchers were losing the name game so badly to the Tyrannosaurid researchers that they gave up on Greek and Latin naming conventions altogether. And then, as the ultimate troll, there is considerable evidence that Labocania isn't a Carcharodontosaurid at all, but that it is a Tyrannosaurid. So they gave it a garbage name and then handed it off to the Tyrannosaurid researchers like the ultimate gift that they didn't want. Now I don't know which group is winning the game. Well played, Team Carcharodontosauridae. And so I will turn this over to the Tyrannosaurid researcher that I know the best, so that he can tell you what he knows about this beast and give us his opinion about whether or not he thinks Tyrannosauridae should keep this poorly named gift or give it back.
So Labocania is a very fragmentary animal. It's, as we might mention later, it's a mid-sized theropod, and it's incredibly fragmentary, like much of the animals that we've talked about today. But what makes it extra hard is the material we do have is not all very diagnostic. And that's where we get these branching opinions, right? Yeah. Now,
because it's not just those two groups that we think it might belong to, is it?
No, it's hopped all over. But those are kind of the two camps right now. That's you get your outliers and your conspiracy theorists. But that's the two main camps right now. And the most recent research suggests it is a tyrannosaurid. However, recent doesn't always mean correct. So let's look at what we have. Now we have fragments of the femur, and there is some diagnostic things in femurs, but we're missing those on this femur. It's pretty fragmentary. We have the very bottom and part of the very top and a little bit in the middle, and we're missing everything in between that tells us what it is. And while it's not very robust, which is typically what we might expect for a tyrannosaur, who are the most robust of the large theropods, abelisaurs are a little bit robust as well, it is actually pretty gracile. However, a lot of the mid-sized tyrannosaurs were more gracile. So that doesn't necessarily make it a Carcharodontosaurid. Now we do have some vertebrae. Now if we had some high spinous processes, or spine tops, that's the tall pointy part on top of a dinosaur vertebrae, we could maybe say, okay, this is a Carcharodontosaurid, because that's common in the group. We don't have that either. We barely have anything to the skull, but there is one thing that is diagnostic, especially in Carcharodontosaurids and Tyrannosaurs, that we have, and that is a tooth. Now, this is the nail in the coffin for me that makes me think it is actually a Tyrannosaurid. The tooth is thick, blunt, and banana-shaped. It's not as big as, say, a T-Rex tooth or even a Tarbosaurus tooth.
Wouldn't that be insane if it were?
It would have some big monster, like plastic vampire teeth in its jaws. But it's still substantially large, because even proportionally, T-Rex has larger teeth than Carcharodontosaurus or Giganotosaurus do. So that is diagnostic to Tyrannosaurus, and the thickness of it. In fact, this tooth looks so similar to a T-Rex tooth that if you found it in the Hell Creek, I'd say it was either one of the more rear teeth in the jaw or from an adolescent animal. It is a very thick tooth. It's even thicker than some of the like Daspletosaur or Gorgosaurus teeth I've seen. That, and it has very large serrations. That, to me, suggests that Labocania is, in fact, a tyrannosaurid instead of a carcharodontosaurid. However, you get variation within groups, and this fragmentary of an animal definitely still has a lot to learn about it. So, until then, its identity crisis persists. So,
Thank you very much. Yeah, I know a paper has been published this year
yep,
claiming that it is a tyrannosaurid,
correct.
and a paper has been published this year claiming that it is a carcharodontosaurid. So I really appreciate your opinion, and I think I agree with you.
But we'll see.
So given these recent findings, Labocania might just be a tyrannosaurid. And this is not the only recent discovery that makes me think that we might need to re-examine the tyrannosaurids in the not-so-distant future. We're actually going to start down that path next week, because Dinosaur December is the greatest! But right now, we have 2 more carcharodontosaurids that we need to discuss. And I'll just tell you right now, I was going to just call it right here, but one of these last 2 might be the coolest carcharodontosaurid of all, so we couldn't stop now. And let's start with the less cool one, but the one that is more closely related to everything else that we've discussed so far, Eocarcharia, which lived in northern Africa around 112 million years ago. So before Carcharodontosaurus, but in roughly the same location. And, as is typical for theropods across the board, older members of the lineage are generally smaller than their later relatives. So Eocarcharia is not quite as large as Carcharodontosaurus, but no shame in that. Giganotosaurus may not have been quite as big as Carcharodontosaurus either. But at 6 to 8 meters, Eocarcharia was no slouch. The name Eocarcharia means dawn shark, a fine name, especially for an early Carcharodontosaurid. Though the dawn of sharks was 4 times as long ago as were these dawn sharks, but whatever. And we really only know about it from a few bones. And here is a real tooth from one. Ethan has one. In fact, he has more than one, and another one is available on his website right now. So if you would like to own your own piece of Eocarcharia, you actually can, and we'll have a link down in the description, and there's a whole ton of other fossils and amazing casts. Ethan has some of the most incredible stuff I've ever seen, and I want all of it. So check it out. But this is one of the only fossils of this animal on the planet. That said, the dinosaur that I really want to talk about is this one, Acrocanthosaurus, the most distant relative of Giganotosaurus and everything else that we've discussed that we're going to discuss today. And according to Ethan, this is the coolest member of the whole family, despite not being the largest member of the family, but close, at 11 to 11.5 meters and weighing 4,400 to 6,600 kilos. And I know we just discussed a Carcharodontosaurid that was likely actually a Tyrannosaurid, but this is a Carcharodontosaurid that acted like a Tyrannosaurid and lived in the same place too. They were found in North America between 113 and 110 million years ago. Its name means high-spined lizard, or reptile. Could be reptile. That's not the most Tyrannosaurid name, but it is accurate, and the way that scientific names are supposed to work. It has very high spines on its vertebrae, a bit like Meraxes, but bigger, and largely over the cervical vertebrae. And this is important because it wants to be a Tyrannosaurid. But actually, I'm going to turn the time back over to Ethan to talk to you a little bit more about what I meant by that, and why Acrocanthosaurus is the coolest of all of the relatives of Giganotosaurus included.
Acrocanthosaurus is an insane animal. It's such a deeply cool Carcharodontosaurid, and what I love about it is it's hard to say because so much of the group is fragmentary, but from what we can tell, it's one of the Carcharodontosaurids that did something different from Carcharodontosauridae, and while more similar to maybe something we'd see in tyrannosaurs, it's still different from even them. It's a kind of completely unique theropod in its own right. Now, high-spined reptile, like you mentioned, refers to the spine tops on top of the vertebrae, the spinous processes. And what's cool is this would have been similar to what you see in a bison, essentially a muscle hump that would have grabbed onto the top of the vertebrae and been reinforced, and that would have allowed it to have a much more powerful bite and pull and grappling ability than even other Carcharodontosaurids. But what's extra cool about Acrocanthosaurus, beyond the fact that it was probably a little proportionally stronger than the rest of the members of its family, is that it actually could lock its neck vertebrae too. and we didn't understand why for a long time until recent research suggests that its teeth weren't quite the slashers like we might see on the rest of Carcharodontosaurids. They still were very similar, but they're a little bit thicker and a little bit more straight. And what we realized is that this is probably for gripping and pulling other dinosaurs instead. So the neck vertebrae are locking so that there's a lot less ability for resistance in its prey. This means instead of slashing necessarily, it was gripping and pulling out chunks. Really, really cool.
Not if it's happening to you.
Not if it's happening to you. But luckily, there's 100+ million years between us and Acrocanthosaurus. Although it was likely even here in Utah. We've only found them in Texas, but it was likely all across the central western U.S. at the time.
So cool.
Now, Acrocanthosaurus is also and we hinted to this earlier, is also the only Carcharodontosaurid that we have strong behavioral evidence for.
Oh, yes.
Because there is a trackway set in Texas where the rock dates to the same time as Acrocanthosaurus, and the trackways line up with the size of Acrocanthosaurus, meaning it's just the most likely candidate for the animal that made them. Now, at first, what we see is likely along a beach, a sauropod moving at a higher speed than most sauropod trackways.
And you said an extremely large sauropod.
A large sauropod, feet like trash can lids, huge. Enough where several of my feet could fit inside it. I could probably curl up in a ball inside this big sauropod trackway. Very large. Most likely belonging to Sauroposeidon or another similarly sized early to mid-Cretaceous North American sauropod. And what's extra cool is, like I said, this sauropod is moving at a clip. Now, sauropods can't move very fast already, but we can tell from the pace and the way it's landing its feet that it's moving quicker than we typically expect. And all of a sudden, three-toed trackways appear alongside it, meaning that Acrocanthosaurus, or that's our best guess at it, is running alongside the sauropod. So the reason the sauropod is moving is because it's got to move. There's a carnivore chasing it. What's extra cool, though, is this goes on for a little bit of a ways, and all of a sudden the Acrocanthosaur tracks disappear. And then they reappear about 20 feet down the way. And what's really cool is if you look at those sauropod tracks during that missing gap of the Acrocanthosaur tracks, the weight shifts to the right, where the Acrocanthosaur was running, and the tracks actually land perpendicular, meaning our best guess is that Acrocanthosaurus jumped on the side of this long-necked dinosaur and was grabbing and pulling and ripping at whatever it could, and then the sauropod managed to shake it off, and it landed and then took off running alongside it again. Now, what's extra cool about this is Acrocanthosaurus technically should not be able to jump based off of its size, but obviously it successfully did. Now, we don't know if that's something to do with its hump on its back. Maybe the muscles allow it to have a little more oomph when it's leaping onto the sides of long-necked dinosaurs. We don't know if dinosaurs just could handle weight stresses more than we predicted. But either way, that's direct evidence of a Carcharodontosaurid hunt and Acrocanthosaurus leaping onto the side of a sauropod dinosaur, which makes Acrocanthosaurus, in my opinion, the coolest of the Carcharodontosaurids.
That is so cool. He's the cookie cutter shark
of Carcharodontosaurus, exactly.
And that takes us through Giganotosaurus and its closest relatives. What group should we cover next?
Tyrannosaurus again.
Agreed. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. And happy Dinosaur December! So that's Giganotosaurus. Clearly an incredibly rad dinosaur, but not as cool as a train.
That's so rad.
Yeah.
So rad.
Trains.
That's my favorite dinosaur.
Clint's trains?
Absolutely.
Just a B-roll.
And then we can do fun with flags.
Fun with flags, yes.
Bro, only thing is, I'm not... Okay, it's actually right. Top 11. I'm nervous. I'm scared. Top 11. 100% it's left. 100%. Alright, I've actually been wrong every time. This one's gotta be left, though. It was just right 4 times in a row. It literally has to be left. It's been right 4... It's been right 5 times in a row. Top 9. Top 9. Top 8. Top 8. Five gifted subs and I'll take a guess. 5 gifted subs and I'll take a guess. We good. We good. We good. We good.
Nice.
Bro,
Nice.
chat, I don't want to just guess. Oh my god, Quinn actually gifted 5. Alright, it's right. Listen to me. I've worked with glass for 30 years. Bro, why are my guesses always wrong? Why are my guesses always wrong, bro? How? How are my guesses always... One more. I'm never guessing again, bro. That's why I never guess, bro. I always get bullshitted.
Looking good.
I literally always get bullshitted, bro. Mods, run a prediction. I'm gonna go take a pee. Oh my god, my mic's back. Let's go. Run a prediction. Run a prediction. Run a prediction. Run a prediction. I'm gonna go pee. Chat, one more. Run a prediction. Run a prediction.
That's it. I want to. Yeah.
Hey, chat. We will win this game, I
Alright, we'll do a ground level sweep and then we'll probably
High Vice, what are you doing? High Vice, what
make
are
any
you doing?
dinosaurs or anything today, but here's what it
We will
is.
win this game. Trust me, chat. Let High Vice play. No, we're not letting him play. No, High Vice, no!
Alright, so
Wait, my voice chat's
arrive
back.
here.
Yes.
Follow up lights.
Chat, let's see
There's
how
no
fast
lights
Roblox
going
will
that
ban
way,
me
so
on
it's
voice
pretty
chat.
clear not to go that way.
Let's actually see. Let's see how fast Roblox will actually ban somebody on
Got
voice
that
chat.
to hide the power generator or the whatever the fuck that is.
Ain't no party like a diddy party.
Yeah.
Green light.
Alright.
Green light.
7. Is that LeBron?
Green light.
JC 2320.
Please! I
Got
played
that
these games
sound in the
before!
back coming out that
Everybody listen
side.
to the gorilla. Gorilla, what should we
Exit
do?
here.
What should we do, gorilla?
When you
Everybody
exit,
keep
you
running.
walk right
Keep
underneath the
running.
T-Rex light.
Okay.
So that's pretty cool.
Green light. Hey, what the heck, man? Hold
Got
still.
a rock
Sure, I
wall
got you. I'm
side
gonna put this
facilities.
looking mix. I mean, free.
Green light.
What? Oh.
And then I'm trying to make it clear to redirect people that way,
Hey,
but hopefully they don't. This
what?
just the park staff
Hey,
there,
man.
and he's,
All right.
hopefully they don't mix it up. But
You played these games before? You did?
on the left are the hotels,
Sit your ass
and on
down.
the right are all the
You played
shops.
these games before, dude?
The gorilla made it. Big bum gorilla made it.
Green light.
Fire dark skin.
What an
JC forming a line for me.
Green light.
Hey, let's all
Howdy,
dive
Chunko,
in.
Chunko,
Hey, let's
Chunko.
all make it
Got
a
2
line.
large standard hotels, a small
What?
standard
I'll make
hotel
it
in the
a line.
middle.
I played these.
emergency bunkers and shelters back here if they need them. And,
Oh my god, it's Ninja.
Guys, I really don't.
2320, what happened last night, JC?
Yo, get out of my face, bro.
that's bad.
Wasn't like that.
All this stuff.
Wait, Dreambot, come over here, bro.
They all have pretty good views.
Oh my god, it's Diddy. Oh wait, that's
I like
low now.
standard hotel views the best.
I mean, they're the same. Go on the road. I got what they waiting for. Hey, chat, watch this. Ready?
I got umbrella.
Triangle.
I got the Mona Lisa.
Bang! Oh, you got the Mona Lisa? Oh, I'm so sorry. Not!
Customers.
Why is circles so
JC.
Everybody listen to me! Lick the cookie!
Park connections right there.
I don't. High five, stop!
Sushi. Coffee.
Whoa!
Burgers and fries. Ice
Can this
cream.
kid move? Whoever this kid is.
Toys. Smoothies. Clothes and accessories. Gourmet steaks. I go ahead and turn the volume back on. A second, I guess I don't echo. And drinks. And fucking keep James Lawson restricted that. That's seafood food there. That's the park so far, so I got a lot to add to it, but I think we got to stop here. We've been building this for well over an hour. I hope you guys enjoyed though. We'll see you around. Deuces.